Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Hord's Dairyman monthly webinar. My name is Abby Bauer, and I'm an editor for Hord's Dairyman magazine. I will serve as the host for today's program, which will focus on improving hoof health in dairy cattle. If you are listening to the presentation live, you have access to a PDF copy of the slides that you can print or save on your computer. That handout can be found in the handout section of the GoToWebinar control panel. I also invite you to type in any questions that you have for our presenter into the questions section of that control panel, and we'll answer those following the presentation. Our sponsor for today's webinar is Hoof Zinc, and we thank them very much for their support of our program. It is my honor to introduce you to today's speaker, Karl Burgi. Karl has served the international hoof health industry for over 35 years. He is a founder of Sure Step Consulting International and the Save Cows Network companies. As a hoof care provider and consultant, Karl collaborates with industry leaders around the world to minimize lameness and foster animal well-being by facilitating hoof health educational programs and seminars. In addition, he continues to develop hoof health equipment and products to service the needs of the modern dairy farm while ensuring cow comfort is a top priority. His personal passion and business mission is to help save cows and do that by improving the hoof health in dairy cattle all around the world. So, Karl, thank you so much for joining the webinar. And we're looking forward to hearing your presentation, which is titled Beyond Locomotion Scoring, the Overlooked Strategies for Improving Hoof Health.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you for the nice introduction, and I guess thank you to Hoof Zinc for sponsoring this. With being in this business for so long, working with farms all over the world, you can see here, this would be the ideal, but it's not realistic for very large farms. But these farms also have their problems. So today's talking points will be, we're just going to talk a little bit about the costs and losses, locomotion or mobility scoring, understanding the lameness etiology. So what's actually happening inside of that foot? I try to explain that better. And then we're going to talk about managing inflammation with data and timely intervention. And part of this is really the unlocking the potential for the high milk yielding cows, because we know if those cows stay around, they milk a lot of milk, and we'll see some examples later on, and then we have a conclusion. So when we look at these are studied cited information that show the lameness losses, and you can see here on the kilos of milk with digital dermatitis, all of those, this has been around for a little while. You can see that, and you can see it increases the calving intervals. There was several studies done on that, and cows spend less time in the herd. And you can see here that the sole ulcer, which we're mostly going to talk about today, okay, has the highest loss, has less days in the herd, but a lot of times these are the high yielding cows. These are the high yielding cows, and what can we do to get them further going? So, and the other thing here is we just did a study in 22 on a high yielding farm, and what we saw was when cows are lame in the first 60 days of milk, it automatically opened an average of 19 days to the days open. And this is a farm that has a close to a 40% preg rate. So another thing here is Lindsay Frilato and Betsy Hicks in New York, they did some economic study, and what you can see here on the top, some benchmarks like lameness reassesses, you can see total lameness cost, all of that. But what I really want to point out here is total lame cows. So they did a survey on 9 farms. Lameness that lowest lameness was 16.7%. The highest lameness was 31.1%. And then we go to the next one. You can see here that the severely lame ones was 10.7 all the way down to 1.8. Okay, 2 farms at 1.8. Our goal is to have severely lame cows, do not have those cows at 1.8. at any given day when we locomotion score, for me, it's too many cows. And so we're going to talk what we can do about that. And you can see the highest one had 10.7% of severely lame cows. And the only other thing I'm going to point out here, the rest of you guys can all look at it yourself, but when you look at the benchmark cost is $6.30, there is farms that spend almost $1, more than $1 more, okay, at $7.74, and there's farms that spent a whole lot less, and you can see the farm that spent a whole lot less had the highest lameness rates. So just getting into that, I don't want to spend any more time on that. I want to talk more about locomotion and mobility scoring. What it is used for in a lot of pies is to identify and treat lame cows, and it's done, for me, it's done on a bi-weekly or monthly basis. And what I see a lot of times is if there is action taking about it, it's good. But again, lame cows, we have to identify them daily. And my experience has been is that scoring works for identifying lame cows, but it's ineffective on most farms because of the lack of actions. What do we do on a, and we're going to look at on a 5 scale, what do we do with the 2s and 3s, or with the 3s and 4s, 4s, so it's kind of like we're not taking good enough action with those things. And for me, a lot of times when we already see that 4, we're already too late on it. We want to get them, we don't want to have those 4s. And the other thing ends up to be is this, a lot of times there is not enough trim slots when a trimmer comes in to actually take care of those extra cows. What about mobility scoring cows that have permanent damage? And that's what we're going to talk about more, because those cows, they're always going to walk with and we're going to show that right now, is they're always going to walk with a 2 on a 3 scale, or with a 3 with a 3 on a 5 scale. So what are we going to do with those? They're always like that. So that's what this session is about. When diagnosed, a lot of times those cows are already lame and we're too late. So when you look at here, this is a good video. Healthy cow carries her head straight, up high, flat back, long steps. We never have to worry about a cow like that. And I prefer on the farm anymore the 1 to 3 scale, because we make better decisions on the farm, okay? So the number 2 cow, you can see here, she carries her head a little bit lower. She's arched. She arched when she stands. Here, this is the cow. We either need to pick it up or we need to look at the records. And this cow, as we're going to see later, she has internal damage from lesions before. And so she's never going to walk with a flat back again. And that's what we can explain later. And then when we get to this one, everybody can figure this cow out, right? This is the cow she's easy to find, right? The lame ones. What I'm finding on a lot of farms is the more lame cows we have, the poorer job we're doing identifying the cows that need attention. Even with the locomotion scoring, again, because we're not we don't have enough trim slots, or we're not using the records like we should. And that's what I want to talk about it more. So easy, like cows like this here, they need to be looked at every day. And what I'm finding is on the very low lameness herds, where we're like, at that 1.8% or even at 4%, any cow that's abnormal on a given day, people figure it out. Even the stockmen that bring the cows up, they notice she didn't get out of the stall. But when we have 20 cows in a pen that don't get out of the stall, well, nobody pays attention. And that's why for me, I see maybe initially to do a locomotion scoring, but we really need to look more at some of the other things and understand what's actually happening. Let's look at the lesions here that we're dealing with. So the sole ulcer, for me, it's always on the outside hind claws. See, that's a pretty early one. So this cow might have walked with a 3. She wouldn't have been probably lame with this. You can see she's got a block. I'm calling the sole ulcer is the standing disease. And sole ulcers, we're going to learn later, once they're happening once, they'll reoccur over and over. And there's good data to show that. We showed that at a session a couple of years ago, okay? The white line lesion, you know, when we look at the causes there, for me, it's the flooring, the perching in the stall, especially in the summertime, holding pen time, or holding pen, running the cow gates too hard, stockmanship with rough cow handling, and then walking distance. The further they walk, especially grazing cows, the more repetitive motion there is, the higher the white line lesions will go. These are the two main ones, clawhorn lesions, really, that we're going to talk about, mostly about the sole ulcer, because I think the sole ulcer is one of those that reoccurs over and over again. The white line lesion, you know, there's not as high of a repeat rate on the white line lesions as there is on the sole ulcer. So when we look at a graph, this is off a dairy comp, and you can see here the red, okay, the red would be sole ulcers. The green here that we see where most of them would be white line lesions. And that's the two we're going to focus on. And what you can see here, sole ulcers, we have some right early lactation, and then we find them in mid lactation, so from about 100 days to 120 days, okay, 125 days, so during the mid lactation trim. So there's like a window when they occur, and we're going to get too much to that later. When we look at this particular graph, there is way too much lameness in early lactation. You can see here after we do the mid lactation trim, look at what happens, right? And it never goes up as high again because the dry cow trims are spread out. So this is on larger farms, of course, but the lesions that happen, you can see here, we'll explain these a little bit more, and I want to especially explain the sole ulcers. When we look at the other two or three diseases that we commonly look at is the toe ulcers. It's a standing inflammation wear. So we're going to see more toe ulcers, more thin soles, couple months from now, beginning of August or middle of August, okay? But for me, toe ulcers most generally is the over trimming disease. Everywhere I go in the world, if I fix the over trimming, toe ulcers almost disappear, you know, unless we have thin soles, unless we have too much wear. And then we look at digital dermatitis as hygiene immunity. We talked lengthy about that this last time. I don't think anything has changed. And foot rot is immunosuppression, skin abrasion, and again, the health of the animal, weaker animals. So that covers all the lesions. But we're going to go just into a little anatomy. And you can see here a nice pedal bone, healthy. So this is a really healthy claw. It has a convex dorsal wall. And you can see the pedal bone. You can see the corium. The corium is on the outside. That's the horn-producing tissue. Okay, the hoof wall or supporting edge. The white line connects the hoof wall to the sole and the heel. And then we have the digital cushion in here. And this is a nice, healthy digital cushion. Okay, we painted that in there just to see, and you can see the digital cushion doesn't reach in the toe. So in the toe, there is no digital cushion. Anatomically, there is a reason for that, okay? When we look at this healthy claw, the healthy claw will have a nice, healthy pedal bone in there that's really nice and smooth. And we have that convex dorsal wall, and you can see here the corium and the lamina, they look nice colorless like they should. So that it's okay. When we go on the other side, you can see the concave dorsal wall. So in this now we have a reduced digital cushion. When we go from side to side, we have a pedal bone that's probably already modified because inflammation, when we have inflammation, all the red in here is due to inflammation. So eventually, there is some yellow, the blood serum leaks out, and then the more inflammation we have, so the more inflammation we have, the more blood gets mixed in with the horn. So some people will call this laminitis, okay? It's basically, this would be choroiditis and laminitis together, but let's just use inflammation as the main cause. So what we can see now is inflammation causes big changes within the claws. And what it is it changes the dorsal wall from convex to concave. It modifies the pedal bone. It reduces the distal cushion. And that's what we're going to get next. In 2002, Reber from Switzerland showed that normal healthy fat pads or distal cushion had like 3 cylinders, 1 center one and 2 outside ones. And you can see here again, they don't go all the way into the toe. And the talk then already was if there is inflammation, the distal cushion or the fat gets reduced and replaced by connective tissue. There is studies done on this. Yeah, you know, I've cut a lot of feet apart over the years, and you can definitely see in unhealthy claws, sometimes there is no fat, there's just connective tissue there. So the thing here is, the goal of keeping that cow healthy is to keeping the distal cushion healthy, keeping it there for that animal for the rest of the life. And we don't, as soon as it's reduced to connective tissue, the damage is also done to the pedal bone. So there's permanent damage. We can never bring it back. We can never bring the fat back, or can never bring the distal cushion back. And it doesn't have anything to do with skinny cows. Once we have inflammation, as an example here, you can see very good. This is a heifer that was trimmed 30 days after calving. You can see the redness on both outside claws. Over here, you see the redness. In my opinion today, as soon as we see redness, the redness is due to inflammation for one reason or another. Maybe her walking with the other, not being trimmed before calving. That's where I would see it. If I trim heifers before calving, I don't see it. But for me, I think this is the pre-thing that leads to actually do the damage to the bone, the loss of the distal cushion. The more hemorrhaging there is, means the more inflammation there was. Okay, you can see there's very little here, there's more over here on this one. So redness again is inflammation. Okay, so the cycle resulting in permanent damage is when that fat pad gets reduced, the pedal bone modifies itself. And you can see here, I have 3 types of pedal bones. A healthy one, this is probably the inside claw, this is the outside claw. And this is what happens with age. Okay, if we don't have any inflammation, never have inflammation. So if the cows don't, like we talked at the beginning of the season, if they don't stand too much, the pedal bone actually stays quite well. And I've seen pedal bones out of older cows which had a little bit of modification, but not like this. This one more than likely had a sole ulcer, also had a white line, because you can see the damage on the pedal bone. It's not as smooth anymore as it was over there. So the damage is done. Once the damage is done, it's irreversible. It's there for the rest of the life. And what's happening then is we can only prevent. So we need to prevent inflammation by making sure cows lay down. But I think we can do, today we know we can do a good job by also functional trimming. So the results from that inflammation, what you see is the permanent damage. You see the overgrowth on those lateral claws. And when you trim it away, you come down to unhealthy horns. So that means there was some inflammation there in the past. Anytime the corium, the pedal bone is damaged, the distal cushion is reduced, the horn actually grows faster on the sole. That's a natural reaction. And you can see here, when we trimmed it out more, we got down to some yellow red horn, and that's very near the corium. But the damage is done, so the damage is done for life. This animal will always be coming back again, grow horn faster, so we need to understand and keep track of those type of things. Another thing I wanted to go to quick here, this was a really good study that was done in Japan in 2018. And came out in 2018. 30 farms, 4,000 cows, in which you can see here the sole ulcers, okay, they were followed 2 months of the hottest time of the year. Okay, a little bit less in 2017 over 2016. But now the other thing and you can see the high temperature was 78 Fahrenheit or 25 C. It really wasn't that hot, but the sole ulcers went up. You see it here now by days in milk. Look at where the sole ulcers are. They're all in the first 150 days of the lactation, and then they keep going down. That's the peak. And again, too many, way too many in that early lactation. So what we need to understand is that the soul ulcers are related to that standing time of the summer heat, even though it was only 25 degrees C. They're more common in very early lactation, and they go down as the lactation, as they get later in the days in milk. Understanding and managing inflammation. So when we look at, this is some new work from Telesenko out of Sweden, and you can see here on a grazing cow, okay, what the red means, that's where the load comes on when the cow is under it, okay? So this is at a 48-degree angle. And so the load is on what I call is on the hoof wall, is on the supporting edge. When you go to this one here, is if the same cow at 50 degrees is on concrete, look at where the load is. The load is a little bit on the outside. That's the outside claw, so that would be the similar as the one on the left in the grazing cow. There's a little bit of a dark red spot here, but a huge red spot in that center area. And really, this is something for me is common sense. And when Telesenko did this work, it was so logical to me because I saw that in the field. So here we have an overload of the sole. So it's really crucial that we manage inflammation with cows on concrete and focus on the high risk periods. You know, another thing is we need to make sure those cows have 12 hours a day of lying time and supervise those time budget. We need to create a high producing cow-centered environment, okay? And emphasize on transition, fresh cows, and peak production periods. What we do is we collect data at the time of hoof trimming, okay? Because we saw those heifers before they had hemorrhaging. Maybe it won't amount to anything, but they have a higher risk, those heifers, to having hemorrhaging again in the second lactation, okay? So we want to be consistent with the data. So we want to identify, you know, generally we only identify sole ulcers, white line lesions, toe ulcers. And for this, we have to identify hemorrhaging. The sole hemorrhaging is designed to take action. And these cows can have sole hemorrhaging and they're still walking with a locomotion score 2 on a 3 scale. But we don't know if we should pick them up or not. But if we have data, we can look at that data. If we delay that action to intervene, then we get sole ulcers. And for me, when that sole ulcer starts, we start the vicious cycle, and we'll see that in just a little bit. So intervention at the correct time is crucial, okay? Higher risk for acute lamenesses with production losses. So when those sole ulcers occur, we're gonna lose production, and they're more likely gonna reoccur again, okay? So here, have an 8 lactation cow, and these are just some examples I pulled from one of the herd. She's 48 days in milk. You can see her milk yield is, she calved in February, okay, late January, and she's been up here all the way up to 130, 160 pounds here in June, okay? This cow has never had a lesion to date, but she has a right rear foot that has a slight medial claw rotation, and we bring her in every 90 days to trim those back feet quickly. We let her go, and you can see here. So she would have been done at probably 35 to 40 days, 30 to 45 days after calving, and then again at 120 days. So you can see here, this was the mid-lactation trim at 142 days in milk. That's kind of how we do it. Here is some record. So I went into a 200 cow dairy that really is nearly 100 pounds of milk per cow per day. And I picked out all the cows that I have hemorrhages recorded on. And you can see here, mostly 1s or 2s. And most of those are, see what you can see is all of them are 4th lactation and over, okay? There's actually 1206 is an 8 lactation cow. This is a 7th lactation cow, 1398. And all we're doing is we're monitoring those. And you can see here, she was done in 22. She was done again. So I picked that for 22, but they were monitored. So every 90 days, we just make them a recheck and we trim the back feet on them. So in general, this farm, we trim them 2 times per year. They have sand bedding, they're overstocked, and like I said, they have a high milk yield. What's happening is I'm not going to talk much about trimming, but basically what we need to do is we need to transfer that load into the toe triangle, okay, with the functional trimming. So you can see here on the left-hand side, we put the angle gauge on, and it's probably 38 to 40 degrees, okay? If we trim it, if we do the right thing, that angle comes up to 52 degrees, which the 7 trim rule is. Today, if I would do it again, it'd probably be 55 degrees, because I think it's beneficial to have a better angle than a weaker angle. And then the next step would be is to model that rear lateral claw, and that just explains it all on there. I'm not going to get much into that. When we look at it, here is a heifer raised on pasture. One of them is raised in confinement. Both of these are heifers before calving. You can see this one is not as overgrown on the lateral claw. This is already quite overgrown on the lateral claw. This one, if we don't trim it, she will have hemorrhaging, more hemorrhaging, even more than the grazing one, even if we have good cow comfort. So what do? We do step 1 and step 3. Basically, we stand them up on their toes and we model the lateral claw. Okay, and that's the functional trimming for these heifers. Even on these grazing heifers, what we did here is by just taking a little bit off the toe, we increased that angle from probably 48 to 53 to 52 to 55. And that already makes that anatomy of the claw function better. It's not the goal of this session here to explain all of that. That would be another session, but that's what we're learning from some of the work we can see later. So as an example, if we go, for me, this is preparing heifers for the calving. And we know that heifers, from some research work, we know that heifers have a higher level of inflammation at first calving, which is natural for giving birth and natural to have inflammation in the body. And once you have inflammation in the rest of the body, it also shows up in the feet. But if they're properly trimmed, it's okay. And what we're seeing today as an example, a lot of heifers that are raised on the dry lots out west in Kansas, Colorado, Nebraska, I would say probably 75% of the heifers are probably even better than this. They probably don't benefit much unless the toes are long, but there's probably about 15 to 25% of the heifers, even raised on those dry lots, that will benefit from trimming as heifers pre-fresh 3 to 8 weeks before calving. And the reason is to prepare them so we prevent the first hemorrhage ever to happen, because when I do this, I can bring them back at mid-lactation. I never see a red hemorrhage, because as we see later, the weight is again where it needs to be. So if you guys look at it, this is a left rear on a heifer. So this was before trimming, this was after trimming. Okay, and you can see here, maybe just a little bit more than 52, because we got a little bit of daylight on the top there, just a little bit. Okay, and then when it's done, that'd be the same way. So these heifers are raised in a confinement setting, and this is what we do. We do step 1, basically a functional trimming, modern functional trimming, and then step 3 is important. The important thing to say here is that we don't come too far down into the toe. So, and we showed that before. When we do the modeling, go back to the other, if you guys go back to the picture before, the step 3, we need to stay out of the toe triangle, and we need to make sure the sole thickness is sufficient in the toe. Okay, so when we do this, and this is again Telesenko's work, is so if we don't do the modeling, you can see we have a fair amount of red here, and that's inflammation. That causes more pressure. That causes more horn production. That causes that sole ulcer to become reality after a while, especially if the cows stand a lot. But if we do a larger top of modeling, you can see on that lateral claw, all the weight is on the hoof wall. The medial claw, no matter what we do on the medial claw, in Telesenko's work, they don't change, even on a grazing cow. They're so similar, all the medial claw, but it's the lateral claw of the hind foot that shows this. And the more we model, the better angle we get. With a steeper angle, we can take that whole load and shift it out on the supporting edge, on the hoof wall. And that's the goal with these high yielding cows, to do that from a heifer's age, so it never happens. So that's how we manage inflammation. We have the best claw function that way. And we do that with time. So 3 to 8 weeks before calving or a dry off. And then again, we're coming back to that. We want to have a steeper dorsal wall angle and that large step 3, okay? So 2 scenarios here, okay? You see here, this is an overgrown claw in a sand freestyle with good lying time. There's no hemorrhaging here. No hemorrhaging, no damage, because she was trimmed as probably as a before, and maybe this was just a long time since she was trimmed before. Normally, I don't see that much. This is a cow in a organic bedding herd. You can see her claws are quite short, but she's quite overgrown. And if we trim her, we have hemorrhaging in that lateral claw. And you could see I couldn't take a lot of length off at all because she was already short, but this keeps growing because the angle probably here is right around 52 or maybe 50 to 52. So we could stand a little bit more angle, but we can't do much about it. So this cow for me would be automatically on a 90-day schedule, okay, automatic. Because if we don't see her, especially in early lactation, so if we do it at dry off, if I see this at dry off, she's going to come in between 30 and 45 days, because what I've learned is the less I have to touch cows or bring cows to the chute between 45 and 120 days, the more milk they're making. Because we have good data that shows that if we bring them in earlier, sometimes that peak doesn't go as high. For me, 30 to 45 days is an ideal time because it's before they go into peak production, okay? It's before we start seeing heats on them or before we're gonna start breeding them. So that's what we wanna do. Unlocking the potential of the high yielding older cows. You can see here, this is an 800 cow dairy, averaging 52, 53 kilos milk, so 112 to 115. They're selling that much per cow with that type of butter fat. You can see the hemorrhaging, that's for the last year. The hemorrhaging here was July and August, and then very little again, and then a little bit more like coming into April, May, but there is months in there where there isn't any hemorrhaging at all. This is all on these 800 cow dairy, that's all the cows in there with the hemorrhaging. So when we go next, we look at the soil ulcers by days in milk or soil ulcers and hemorrhaging. You can see here, we had a few cows with hemorrhaging here in the first 60 days. So that would have been the 30 to 45 day trim. That's when they were diagnosed. We had one soil ulcer in 60 to 90 days. So this is probably a cow that was missed. And then a mid-lactation trim was mostly hemorrhaging. And then a dry off, we had both of it a little bit. So we missed a couple of cows here that actually, and the soil ulcers were actually quite mild. The next thing we look at it is by lactation. And you can see here, we had a little bit of hemorrhaging here in the first and second lactation. Those were odd animals. They're not future prospects in the herd, but no soil ulcers in the first until fourth lactation, okay? And you can see here, even in third lactation, very little hemorrhaging. And then so most of the hemorrhaging and soil ulcers are fourth lactation and over, and that's because we don't have much, we don't hardly have anything here in the first 3 lactations. So unlocking the potential high yielding cows, first we need to raise healthy heifers with good feet and legs, okay? Ensure that those heifers and cows transition through the calving, peak production, heat stress period with functional hoofs. So we want to make sure that those feet are trimmed going to close up, okay, or the claws are functional. Practice the modern functional hoof trimming. Any sign of hemorrhaging at trimming is a red flag. Don't ignore the signs, take action. So put them, if we put them on the list for rechecks, then we don't have soil ulcers at 90 days or 100 days or 110 days. We just have hemorrhaging again at 110 days or 125 days. So 98% of the times, this is only the rear outside claw. So I do a lot of just rear rechecks because I don't see sole ulcers in the front feet. It's not very common. Here we go. We're bringing a practical example in his 74. She calved in November. She was trimmed previous to that in the end of June of 23. Mid-lactation trim was at 320. And I took this picture after I had a trim, but when you look at the next foot, that's what her right rear foot looked like. So this would have been a cow. I either missed her when she went dry, she didn't have hemorrhaging. So this actually went too long. You can see here the overgrowth. So yes, it was nearly 9 months since the last trim. But just to explain what happens, and you can see here, she had hemorrhaging on the other back one too. All I did is functional trimming. I didn't apply a block because it was March, right? And I rechecked it a month later. No more hemorrhaging, no more, maybe a little bit of hemorrhaging, very little there. Or you can see the yellow discoloration from the recovery, okay? We're gonna see it again now, the same cow, we're gonna see it again. Oh, we're gonna see it again. That was eight weeks later. You can see 8 weeks later how that left rear has grown in, okay? So this is what was done in April. And 2 months later, that whole thing, because of the damage there, grew in again. But see here, she didn't have a sole ulcer. She had slight hemorrhaging. I didn't take any action. The same thing on the right ear. I just did that functional trim, put her up on her toes again, modeled that lateral claw to put the weight on the supporting edge. So the weight is carried better anatomically. If there would be pain when I push here on this spot, or stronger hemorrhaging, of course, you would get a block. And we see an example for that later. So here, we have another cow here. You can see here, she had a history. In 21, she had a left ear sole ulcer. In 23, she had a left ear sole ulcer again. At 22, she had a right rear sole ulcer, hemorrhaging, okay? So she's been checked periodically, okay? Dry cow trim. See, we had her on a 3-month schedule there. She's fresh. 12-13, we did it 3 months later in March. In March, she had this, we put a block on it. And then you can see here in June, so she was going, this cow was milking a lot. You can see here, she had a sole ulcer in the left rear in June. So 3 months later, after March, she had strong hemorrhaging on the right rear. But right now, I just prevented a cow coming from severely lame or from actually being lame. And when we looked at the production of this cow, really there was no fluctuation at all. She stayed right there. Another one here is 1501. You can see here, this cow is peaked at anywhere between 174 and 165 pounds. So she's been 130 days fresh, still doing 165. The peak was at 68 days, milk 174. And 5th lactation, she's already 49 days pregnant, okay? And you can see here, she had a hemorrhage at 129 days in milk. We did it at 40 days, 45 days in milk. She had a hemorrhage on the right rear, and she had it again at mid-lactation. So because she's had it before, it's coming back. But we did those 90 days, and it's all due to that damage she had earlier in the year. So now we have to keep her on this schedule, especially that early lactation, especially going into the summer heat now. This cow had the first lifetime hemorrhage as a dry cow in January of 24. So this 1501, she didn't have anything before, okay? So this was the 35, and you can see here, mid-lactation trim, this cow actually had a sole ulcer, and because it was middle of June, I actually put a block on it because you're still milking over 150 pounds a day, and we looked at the production, it didn't change anything. And she really didn't come lame. She walked with a 2 on a 3 scale, and that's how we picked her out. The trimming schedule for confinement heifers, 3 to 8 weeks before calving, and this will be the same thing for dry cows as well. all dry cows at dry off or 3 to 8 weeks before calving, and then the next trim should be 120 to 150 days. If we have an environment where we have already sole ulcers at 90 days, it might be very beneficial to do the 30 to 45 day check and just check the back claws and do the modeling on those outside claws, and then let them go, let them do that peak production and bring them back at 125 days. That seems like working mostly, except maybe during July and August during the summer heat. And then for me, after that, cows with that extended lactation, we should trim like every 120 to 150 days. Some of those cows that became lame at dry off is because we missed them, because they had longer lactations, and then they have a lesion at dry off, and then they become permanent hemorrhage cows or permanent lame cows if we don't do anything about it. With strong hemorrhaging, apply a block. I tend to apply more blocks in July and August, not worry so much like with hemorrhaging. With a little hemorrhage, I don't worry much out between October and really June. I don't worry much about it because a lot of times every farm will be a little different. It depends on the cow comfort. If the cow after a hemorrhage at mid-lactation promptly recovers and you don't see any hemorrhage anymore, I probably wouldn't bring it back after I do the 90 days recheck, but I wouldn't bring it back until dry off, and then, but the next lactation, I put her on the 30 to 45 day schedule because she had the hemorrhaging in her lifetime before. So if hemorrhaging persists every 60 to 90 days, so in the summertime, I'll bring that down to 60, 70 days. In the wintertime, I do that. In the colder season, I go to 90 to 100 days, and it seems to be very sufficient because, again, we have to understand this all has to do with standing time. Final thoughts: prevent lameness with modern functional trimming. For me, we need to keep track of these cows. That's how they're going to make 50 liters average, or 75 liters, up to 75 liters, and they stay in the herd and they're not lame. We don't have to pick them for lameness. So in these particular herds, what we find is we take care of the acute cows right away, and the other ones we do using the data. So we're using the lameness analysis to observe those cows, especially third lactation and over. If I have a first or second lactation with a hemorrhage, she's going to be watched more closely. I'm not going to let her go till the end of the lactation. I'm going to do a back feet trim. And what we have to remember is front feet are just much less of an issue. Very seldom I see sole ulcers in the front feet. And I don't even see hemorrhaging. If they're trimmed in the front 2 times per year, very little problems. It's those back outside claws. And it has mostly to do with what we saw from Telesenko. So we want to utilize that data to track those and manage those high-risk cows. That's how they stay in the herd. And today, with the good pregnancy rates that we have, we don't have to breed a cow back at 60 or 70 days if she's doing 75 kilos, or if she's doing 150 or 175 pounds. What's the point? Especially if the cows are very persistent. In some herds, they're very persistent. They keep that milk up. And again, all of this is due to probably superior cow comfort, superior cow cooling. So they have good beds, deep beds with cow cooling. And even on the hottest days in the summer, we're getting 12 to 12 and a half hours of laying down time. Every year has been checked on the hottest days. These are my final thoughts. There's a lot of potential here, getting to those cows before they really have acute lesions and they're lame. I thank you for listening, and thank you again for Hoof Sync for supporting this webinar.
Thank you very much, Karl, for that presentation. Really appreciate the experience and insight you bring to this topic of hoof care, and then some of the real life examples and pictures that you were able to share. So thank you very much. I would also like to thank Hoof Sync for their support of this program. We really enjoy putting together these monthly webinars and providing information in a different format besides the printed pages of the magazine. And we appreciate companies like Hoof Sync that help us provide these opportunities to all of you. If you would like to watch this webinar again, it will be available on our website later this week. You'll be able to find that on our hordes.com webpage. Just look for the webinar tab. That's where you'll find all of our past webinars, and then this webinar, again, it'll be posted later this week. So if you want to watch it another time or share it with somebody else, you'll be able to find it there. Again, these are monthly webinars. So on the second Monday of every month, we have a program. August 12th will be our next webinar, and that presenter will be John Gazer from Rock River Laboratory and Cows Agree Consulting. He'll be talking about making the most of this year's corn silage. With that harvest season just around the corner in many parts of the country, he'll share his insights on what he's seeing and what he expects for the harvest season. And then in September, we'll have Paul Fricke from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He'll be here to talk with us about some new reproduction research that he and his team have been working on. If those topics sound interesting to you, please make plans to attend. Now we have quite a few questions here, Karl, so I am going to just dive into these and we'll let you answer them. You talked some about frequency of trimming. Do you think trimming 4 times a year could lead to over trimming? Is that too often?
In some cases, so if I have a lot of rubber, okay, like a lot of rubber floors and they have a lot of growth, sometimes we have to, some cows probably need to be looked at 4 times a year. But again, depending on the floors, right? If we would have looked at those footprints from Telesenko on rubber, it would have looked different than it does on concrete. So this was more focused on rubber. So I'm not saying, but again, what I'd like to do there is to not get into that peak production period. You know, and again, I doubt if we'd have to do the front feet 4 times a year. So we do that 30 to 45 day window where we do the back feet. So get them in and out, get them back to eating and laying down, and then do it like after 125 days in milk. So we can avoid bringing them in. And again, we can evaluate data after a while and see when those lame cows actually come on, you know, and schedule it like that. And then do it like, you know, 125 days, maybe do again 3 months later or 4 months later. You know, later lactation is not as crucial with the timing as it is in early lactation.
What are your thoughts about wrapping hooves and any recommendations you have if people are doing that to help cows recover from a lameness issue?
Good question. For clawhorn lesions, the only time I would use a wrap if there's a severe lesion and there is extensive bleeding, but that wrap will come off within 8 to 12 hours. And that's just because we know that the recovery works so much better if air gets to the lesion. With air, no harmful bacteria can grow. And the other thing is, if cows are going through a hoof bath, the wraps can have a negative effect because the wraps will soak up the disinfectant and can create a chemical burn, especially if we use copper sulfate or if we use formalin too strong. It can create a chemical burn on the lesion, on the clawhorn lesion, and hinder the recovery. And the only other time would be is if we have a lesion that doesn't heal, we know there can be a biofilm on there. And we've learned that that biofilm, the only thing that actually gets rid of that biofilm is oxytetracycline. So an application of oxytetracycline for 12 hours, like either an aerosol spray or in the US, we'd use a little bit of OT100 on that lesion for 24 hours or 12 hours, take the wrap off, and we get the recovery.
What do you think about the Dutch method of trimming and if it is still reliable for using on cattle, especially those that are housed on concrete floors?
Yeah. Basically, the method that I'm using is the modified Dutch method. You know, what we do is we focus more on angle, but otherwise, and a larger model on the outside claw. And you could see in those pictures, very little modeling on the inside claw, because what we've learned is from some of the Telesenko's work, the medial claw, no matter what we do to it, it doesn't change the outcome. And we have so few problems on the inside claw. So I'm using the modified Dutch method. That's why I call modern hoof trimming. So it's to try to have more angle and a larger step 3, so a larger model.
What are your thoughts about digital systems to detect lameness with all the technology that is becoming available on dairy farms?
At this point in time, there is still, I mean, there's work being done, but what we've learned is, as an example, with some of the systems, that they have to have 3 to 5 days of negative change in the locomotion. And the issue becomes with that is, from time to time, that's as an example, foot rot comes on in 24 hours or 12 hours. What we found with some of those systems is that if they solely relied on the system, the foot rots were missed, and a lot of those cows actually didn't make it because they were treated too late. So I think they can be an aid, you know, for some of the other things. I think they can be, but at this point in time, in my opinion, the cost for implementing some of those is still too much, and we have too many false positives.
Do you have any herds that you work with that are trimming based on milk yield rather than days in milk? So trimming cows more often if they are higher producing versus lower producing?
All the herds I work with, every herd is in that 100-pound range today, you know, and so we just try to do it when it's best for the cow rather than milk yield, okay? I would say that those higher yielding cows, which we talked about earlier, you know, especially if they have hemorrhaging, they probably need an extra trim. But again, I try to avoid that. I would say I try to avoid that 45 to 110 day range. Do not have to put them in the trim chute during that period of time, just because what some of the data shows that we've been looking at is to not make them vulnerable or bring them away from feed and laying down time during the time when they peak.
Do you have any opinions on dry versus wet foot baths and how this could affect hoof health in the long term?
A dry hoof bath, I think it's been a thing in the past. I haven't seen one in many years, maybe in a tie stall barn where they let the cows out and they use some hydrated lime, or they use some lime and a little copper sulfate in there because they can't use the water, especially in the wintertime. But you know, for me today, a wet foot bath with the right concentrations, like they're published out there, so normal pH between 3 and 5, formalin between 1.5 and no higher than 3%, better to stay below 2.5%, and copper sulfate at about 2.5%. Those are very good options, and even hoof zinc out there is used successfully on quite a few farms.
2 questions here that we're going to ask you to give a little more broad outlook or perspective on hoof health. And the first is the interaction between nutrition and hoof health. And I know you're more focused on the feet than the feed, but maybe what are any recommendations or things you've noticed on herds that have good hoof health, like what they're doing from a nutrition perspective?
So I would say there's probably a couple of things. The biggest thing I would say is consistency in the ration, and that's what everybody's talking. That's what your good nutrition is. So that ration, that it's the same every day, every hour a day, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, right? That's the best thing. There is no good data out there that shows that actually acidosis leads to lameness. There is no good studies out there. There's a lot of old studies that were out there done, but they were done really poorly. So that was looked at. But for me, what's really, really important is to make sure, especially in higher producing herds, zinc is a really important nutrient for cell wall structure and strength of good cell walls and immune system. So zinc is important. In some cases, with high corn silage diets, biotin is quite an effective. But so having the trace minerals and like some of the other things in place are probably just as important as the consistent ration. And when I see those things wherever I travel in the world with consistent rations, I could never say that something's going back to nutrition, because when it would be really a nutritional problem or a big problem, it would affect all 8 claws on the cow, not just the 2 back outside claws.
Can you speak on the importance of lying time and its connection to lameness?
Okay, good question. When we go back, one of the pictures I showed with the healthy corium and inflamed corium there towards the beginning. When a cow lays down, there is natural blood flow to those feet. The pressure is off the feet, or the pressure is off, okay? So that blood can circulate naturally when they're laying down, okay? The same thing happens when they're walking. When they're walking, they're pumping that blood. When they're standing there, the blood actually reduces circulation. So they have impaired circulation, and if that adds up to more hours per day, and that's what we're seeing, some of the work that Chair Kramer did at Minnesota and Nigel Cook at Wisconsin, the lower the laying time went, the higher the lameness went. So, and what we saw is if we have 12 hours, 11.5 to 12 hours of lying time a day, we see very few soil ulcers. We see very little hemorrhaging, okay? And the example that I showed you, both of those herds they're getting 12 hours of laying time per day, and that's why we treat very few cows with soil ulcers.
You mentioned this at the beginning of your presentation. I mean, more of our modern day farms are housing cattle on concrete surfaces for more of their lifetime. And if you just had to offer some general advice of how can we ensure that dairy cattle maintain healthy hooves when living in an environment that includes more standing on concrete, like what are just some of, maybe your top recommendations?
First thing is to create the best lying surface we can, okay? So it needs to be comfortable. We know in the summertime we need anywhere up to 2 meters per second of airspeed on those freestalls to get the cows to come in and lay down. Okay, so we need that airspeed. So we need a comfortable, cool freestall for the cows to be encouraged to come in. On the floors, what we need traction on those concrete floors. So we've managed really well, and we talked about that in another presentation. We need to have flat floors with grooves. Or if the floors get slippery, then again, there is ways to fix that. We need good traction on those floors. So cows are confident walking. That already reduces the lesions. The next thing is we need to reduce milking times, especially in the summer. We need to reduce milking times to less than 45 minutes per milking on 3 times a day. Because once those cows go in that holding pen, stand in there for an hour and a half, they're overheating, and then when they come back to the freestall, they won't lay down because their body temperatures are too high. So that's a crucial part of that's why lameness goes up in the summer, because cows get overheated, and an overheated cow won't lay down. So we need to do that, and then we need to manage like headlock. If we have headlocks, if we keep that to 45 minutes milking after milking, or 45 minutes. I see very few problems on the largest herds in the world that use headlocks. We can't bring anything back that it causes headlocks as long as we stay under 35 to 45 minutes. So those are we have 3 points: cool laying surface, great floors, time in a holding pen, and not having cows locked up more than 45 minutes once per day.
Excellent, thank you. And maybe could you talk about the floors and the grooving and what your recommendation would be for people?
What we found was, and if you guys go back to the presentation we did, I think in 21, you can see it in there. So we want to have a 3/4 inch wide groove, so a 1.8 centimeter wide groove that goes in the direction of the traffic. Preferably that's cut in with sharp edges, and the space in between the groove would be about 65 millimeters, so 6.5 centimeters, or from center of the groove to center of the groove would be 3¼ inches for the people that with inches. We want to have those screws going in the direction of the main traffic. And that's what seems to help. Sometimes in the crossovers, we have to put a little extra texture there because that's where cows turn. That's when they're running around, when cows are in heat, that's where they're slipping out. But we've got a lot of good floors around the world that were cut in with those type of patterns. So 3¼ inch center on center. I would say I want to have about 63 to 65 millimeters of flat between each groove.
Thank you. Are you seeing any unique challenges or opportunities with farms that are using robotic milking systems when it comes to hoof health?
Yeah, I think because we're not in there as much, those cows don't get chased around that much. We really have to probably watch them closer, especially those older cows. And we need to make sure that they're not, we have good cow comfort, but again, to look after those older cows that have had hemorrhaging or have had a problem before. I think that's the biggest challenge what I see in some of those robotic facilities. If they watch activity, they can probably see a slight decrease in activity, and then eventually they become lame. So maybe even little less frequent visits to the timely visits to the robot. So I think there's a lot of potential there, studying some of that data, looking at that data, but early intervention. And then probably the biggest challenge in the robotic facilities I see is controlling digital dermatitis. And especially if we have alley scrapers, or alley scrapers would be probably the last that I would have. I probably go to a robot scraper that just removes that manure, not interfering with the cow traffic. And then use a good hoof bath to control digital dermatitis, especially because that seems to be the biggest problem. But if we have good hygiene and no digital dermatitis in the heifers, we can have a nice robot herd with little or no digital dermatitis, where we don't have to use the hoof baths 6 or 7 days a week.
Great advice. And last question for you. Obviously, this is an area that you've been very passionate in for a long time. What do you find the most rewarding about helping farms tackle their hoof problems or keeping cows walking on healthy hooves?
The most rewarding is to not have to deal with lame cows. We'll never have a thing where we have no lame cows. We'll always have lame cows as we have. But if we can get that down to, that 1.8, or let's say 4% per year, 3 to 4% per year, and we do mostly prevention, that's really rewarding. It's not a problem to fix a lame cow, but today I know that once that white line is there or that sole ulcer is there, she's always going to come back to visit me, and she's not going to be able to reach her potential in the herd. And for what it costs today to raise heifers, it's fun to see those herds that have 45% of the cows, or almost 50% of the cows are third lactation and over. And those farms, they're putting out a lot of milk. Those are the farms that are at 110 pounds per cow per day here in North America. Probably they're at 100 pounds in Europe and other places in the world. But the potential there, what's the most fun part is working with those producers, like modifying the trimming schedule, making sure we get everything right so those cows get pregnant again. They don't become lame in the first 60 days, and they calve in again. And we can keep them going for 6, 7, 8 lactations.
Excellent way to wrap up the conversation. Thank you very much to our speaker, Karl Burgi from the Safe Cows Network and Sure Step Consulting International, for sharing all this information on keeping cows walking on 4 healthy feet. I'd also like to thank HoofSync for their sponsorship of today's webinar. And then to our listeners, thank you so much for attending today's program. We appreciate the time you spend with us and hope to see you in the audience for a future webinar. Until next time, goodbye from our team here at Hord's Dairyman.